When I was just 8 years old, my parents decided they had enough of me and sent me to live with my aunt. Even before that, I always knew deep down that my parents didn't particularly enjoy having me around. I could tell that I was more of a burden than a joy to them. They had me in their early 20s, a time when they were just starting their careers and struggling to build a life for themselves. Looking back now, I've come to realize they likely resented me for making their lives harder. But as a kid, I didn't understand why they seemed to dislike me so much. All I knew was that no matter how hard I tried to win their affection, it never worked. Growing up, I was constantly emotionally neglected. Yet, whenever we were around friends and family, my parents would act like the perfect doting parents. It was all for show. Behind closed doors, they would intimidate me into staying quiet, and I always complied because I was terrified of making them hate me even more. This cycle went on for years, and it began taking a toll on me. I started struggling in school, both academically and behaviorally. I acted out frequently and became the kind of problem child everyone warns about. But even now, I don't blame myself. I'm convinced that if my parents had treated me with even a shred of love or care, I wouldn't have behaved that way. When my teachers began complaining about my grades and behavior, my parents decided to take action, but not the kind of action you'd hope for. Instead of addressing the root of the problem, they just scolded me, grounded me, and did everything possible to fix me. At the time, I thought that maybe if I misbehaved even more, I'd finally get their attention, even if it was the wrong kind. But instead of noticing me, they decided they'd had enough. Things took a sharp turn around the time of my 8th birthday. My parents, who rarely seemed happy about anything, were suddenly beaming with joy as they made an announcement at my birthday party. My mom was pregnant. At first, I didn't fully understand what this meant for me, but within a couple of weeks, the answer became painfully clear. One day, I saw my mom packing my bags. My dad sat me down and told me I'd be going to live with my aunt because it wasn't working out for me at home. They claimed they wanted the best for me, but even as a young child, I knew the truth. They weren't sending me away to help me, they were replacing me. I was devastated. I threw tantrums and begged them to let me stay. I promised I'd improve my grades and stop misbehaving. I didn't want to leave everything I'd ever known. My home, my friends, and most of all my parents. No matter how badly they treated me, they were still my parents, and part of me craved their approval and love. But they didn't care. Their minds were made up. The day they dropped me off at my aunt's house, I was heartbroken. We traveled out of state to get there, and I spent the entire journey pleading with them to reconsider. I even tried convincing them that I would be better if they gave me one more chance. But they weren't interested in what I had to say. It never crossed my mind back then that this wasn't about my behavior or my grades at all. They would have sent me away no matter how perfect I tried to be. When we arrived at my aunt's house, my parents stayed for a couple of days to help me settle in. But even then, their indifference was obvious. The only person who made the transition bearable was my aunt. She was and still is one of the kindest, most loving people I've ever met. My aunt is my dad's older sister, the eldest of 4 siblings, and she has a heart of gold. My aunt, who had never married or had children of her own, was the only person who willingly stepped up to take me in when my parents decided to send me away. While her siblings had left the family farm to pursue other careers, she had chosen to stay and manage the land their parents had left behind. From the moment I arrived, she could see how upset I was, and she did everything she could to make the transition easier. She reassured me that I would come to love the farm and feel at home there once I gave it a chance. Her kindness and warmth were the only things keeping me from completely breaking down. When my parents finally left after a couple of days, I couldn't hold back my tears. My aunt, bless her heart, was there for me every step of the way. She kept trying to get my parents to talk to me on the phone, thinking it might help me feel better, but they rarely picked up. For weeks, all I could do was cry, and she patiently stayed by my side, offering comfort and support. Gradually, her unwavering kindness helped me heal, and within a few months, I stopped missing my parents altogether. Living with her was so much better than I could have imagined. Life on the farm was a new experience, and strangely enough, it brought out the best in me. I started doing chores, going to school, and forming friendships. To my surprise, schoolwork didn't seem as daunting anymore. And even my teachers began to notice a positive change in me. My life had drastically improved since leaving my parents, and though we would see each other during holidays, I quickly realized I was far better off without them. My parents had told my aunt they were sending me to live with her because I was a troubled child who needed a change of environment. But after a few months, I opened up to her and told her the truth about how they had always treated me. I told her how much I appreciated her for taking me in and showing me what love and care truly felt like. From that point on, her attitude toward my parents shifted. She became noticeably colder and more distant toward them. In the years that followed, we only saw them at family gatherings, and even then there wasn't much interaction. It was clear that they didn't care about how I was doing, and frankly I didn't need them to. I was thriving without their involvement in my life. As for my sister, she's around 12 now, and I have no relationship with her. From what I've heard through family members, she's not exactly turning out to be the most pleasant person. She reportedly has a nasty attitude and doesn't treat people politely, and she's already known as one of the biggest troublemakers at her school. But that's my parents' problem, not mine. I've been doing well for myself. I'm currently in college pursuing a business degree, so I can take over the farm when my aunt eventually steps back. The college is conveniently close to home, so I visit every weekend to help out on the farm and spend time with her. Last weekend, something unexpected happened. My parents called my aunt because they didn't know how to reach me directly. After nearly 12 years, I had my first real conversation with them. It didn't take long for the call to go off the rails. My aunt handed me the phone, and after some small talk about my life, they dropped a bombshell. They said they were proud of me for doing so well, and wanted another chance at parenting me. They asked me to stay in touch with them, and even suggested I move back in with them after college. I was stunned. I couldn't fathom why they would want me back now after all these years. When I asked them why, they revealed the real reason: my sister. Apparently, she's an even bigger problem child than I was, and it's been humiliating for them. They wanted me to reconnect with them to prove to their friends and family that they're capable of raising good kids. It became painfully clear that their sudden interest in me had nothing to do with love or regret. They wanted me back for appearances, to show the world that they weren't terrible parents. They hoped I could be their proof that they could raise a successful child, unlike my sister, who seems to be giving them a hard time. The audacity of their request left me speechless. I couldn't believe they genuinely thought I would entertain the idea after everything they had put me through. It felt absurd that they were trying to use me to salvage their reputation when they had done nothing to deserve my presence in their lives. I made it crystal clear to my parents that I wasn't going back to them, nor was I going to help them prove anything to anyone. I told them outright that I had nothing to do with them, and they had nothing to do with me. That bridge had been burned long ago. As I've already mentioned, my life was a complete mess while I was living with them, but it drastically improved once I moved in with my aunt. The truth is, I don't think they had problem children. I think they were the problem all along. It would be a lie to say my parents raised me well because they didn't raise me at all. That was a job my aunt took on, and I wasn't about to let them steal the credit for her hard work. Most of our family and even their friends knew I had been raised by my aunt anyway, but my parents' plan was to pretend that they had stayed in touch with me all these years and played a significant role in my life. That was far from the truth. So I told them I wasn't going to help them with their charade and that they were on their own. That's when they threw a tantrum, claiming they had supported both me and my aunt financially for the past 12 years. The reality is they only sent a monthly check that barely covered anything. My aunt had to dip into her own savings to make ends meet, and she never complained about it. Meanwhile, here they were trying to show off the bare minimum as if they'd moved mountains for us. They went on to talk about how my sister had turned out to be a failure, and how humiliating that was for them. They said it was my duty to help them because they were my parents after all. That was my breaking point. I lost it and told them they were anything but parents to me. I told them I didn't even consider them my family anymore, and demanded that they leave me and my aunt alone because she was the only real family I had. Now I'm wondering if I was too harsh for saying that. Am I the asshole for telling my parents I don't consider them my family anymore? Update 1. Hi everyone. Thank you so much for your support and kind words on my original post. Most of you agreed that I'm not the asshole, and that reassurance has really helped me put things into perspective. To be honest, the only reason I doubted myself was because my parents have been relentless over the past week, trying to convince me that what I said to them was horrible. They've been trying to guilt-trip me into thinking I was being nasty to them on purpose. But the more I reflect on it, the more I realize I wasn't out of line at all. I didn't curse them out or go on some hateful tirade. I was just being honest about how I felt. After reading your comments, it's clear to me that my parents are only trying to make me feel guilty, so I'll cave and agree to their ridiculous demands. I've blocked them everywhere, but they keep finding ways to contact me using other accounts and phone numbers, which has been incredibly annoying. I talked to my aunt about it, and she told me to ignore them. She said if I knew in my heart that I was right, there was nothing to feel guilty about. She also spoke to a couple of family members to figure out why my parents were suddenly so desperate to prove they were good parents. That's when we found out the real reason behind all of this. Apparently, at my sister's recent 12th birthday party, she was caught smoking. When my parents tried to take it away from her, she threw such a massive tantrum that she ended up making my mom cry. My mom's older sister, their parents, and a few other family members who were there told my mom that my sister's behavior was a direct result of her and my dad's failure as parents. Apparently, my parents' friends and family had confronted them about how their 12-year-old daughter had access to cigarettes and how they had failed as parents to supervise her. If they had been more proactive, this incident wouldn't have happened. From what I've heard, my parents spoiled my sister from a very young age, never saying no to her for anything. They gave her an excessive amount of pocket money and let her do whatever she wanted, without bothering to supervise or guide her. Basically, my sister grew up knowing she had our parents wrapped around her finger, and the cigarette incident was just one example of how their lack of boundaries had backfired. This incident had caused their friends and family to judge them harshly and call them out on their parenting, which left them desperate to prove they weren't bad parents. That's why they wanted me to come back into their lives, to parade me around like a trophy and show everyone they were capable of raising a successful child. It was pathetic. What's worse is that they should have known this plan wouldn't work because everyone knew I was raised by my aunt. In fact, many people in our family had disapproved of their decision to send me away. My aunt told me that several relatives had even advised my parents to bring me back home after my sister was born so we could grow up together. But my parents dismissed it all, claiming I was happier with my aunt and that they knew what was best for me. Their actions showed they cared more about maintaining their image than about actually being parents. Their behavior with my sister only reinforces that. They were quick to call her a failure and write her off while trying to reel me back in. It's heartbreaking because she's only 12 years old. She needs guidance, counseling, and someone to care enough to help her get on the right path. But I don't think my parents are the right people to do that. They sent me away because they wanted to focus all their resources, time, money, and energy on her. Now, after sacrificing their relationship with me for her, they've failed her too. It's clear to me now that my parents were never cut out to be parents. It would be easy to hate my sister for getting everything I never did. The love, the attention, the resources. But honestly, I just feel bad for her. Despite all of that, she didn't get what she truly needed. A supportive and guiding hand to help her grow into a good person. Somehow my parents managed to fail both their children, and that's the most shocking part of all this. I just hope they stop calling and texting me because I have no interest in speaking to them, especially after everything I've learned. If they try to guilt trip me again, I'm ready to stand my ground and give them a piece of my mind. Update 2. It's been a couple of days since my last update, and just like I said, if my parents tried to guilt trip me again, they were going to get it from me. Well, that moment came a few hours ago. They called me from a new number, and as soon as I picked up, they started telling me how I owed them an apology for what I had said, and that it was time for me to come back home. I was already feeling under the weather today, and wasn't in the best mood. That phone call was the last straw, and I completely lost my temper. I lost my temper and started yelling at them. I made it clear that I wasn't going to apologize for anything I had said because it was all the truth. They were not my parents in any meaningful sense. They had done nothing to earn that title, and if I had to call anyone my family, it would be my aunt. She was the one who had raised me, supported me, and been there for me when they had abandoned me. My parents had neglected me for as long as I could remember, and if they couldn't handle the fact that I didn't consider them my family anymore, they had no one to blame but themselves. They needed to look inward and reflect on their actions instead of constantly calling me to try and guilt trip me into feeling bad for something I had no reason to regret. They tried to interrupt me, insisting that while my aunt had raised me, they had supported us financially, and I shouldn't forget that. I fired back, telling them that the money they sent barely covered any of my expenses. My aunt had to use her own savings to make ends meet, so their financial support was practically meaningless. I reminded them that they wouldn't have needed to send any money at all if they had just taken responsibility for me themselves. Instead, they had dumped me on my aunt and then acted like they were doing her a huge favor by sending child support. I told them that my aunt, out of the kindness of her heart, never spoke about their actions to the rest of the family, even though she easily could have exposed them and ruined their reputation. They needed to stop hiding behind the excuse of money because parenting was about much more than that, something they should have learned after the fiasco at my sister's birthday party. They had thrown money at their youngest daughter too, and look where that had gotten them. A spoiled child they now referred to as a failure. But the real failures, I said, were my parents because they had failed us both. That seemed to strike a nerve because they immediately got defensive. They tried to argue that my sister was happy, and that the cigarette incident was just a one-off thing. But I wasn't buying it. I told them that happy kids, especially ones as young as 12, don't just start smoking for no reason. It was clear to me that they were just trying to convince themselves of a lie because the truth was too hard for them to face. I told them point blank that they were repeating the same mistakes they had made with me, just in reverse. With me, they failed by neglecting me entirely. With my sister, they were failing by overindulging her, throwing money at her, and not disciplining her. They had spoiled her instead of giving her the guidance and boundaries she needed, and now they were facing the consequences of that. I reminded them that their desire to reconnect with me wasn't about fixing their relationship with their children. It was about proving to everyone else that they were good parents. But wanting to appear good and actually being good were two entirely different things. That was too much truth for them to handle. They started screaming at me, cursing me out, and telling me I didn't know what I was talking about. But their defensive reaction only confirmed to me that I had hit the nail on the head. If I were wrong, they wouldn't have blown up like that. We argued for a few more minutes until they finally snapped and said something they probably thought would hurt me. They said they were glad they had sent me away all those years ago because I wasn't good enough to be their son. They claimed they were happy they had chosen to focus on their daughter instead. Then they hung up, likely thinking their words would leave me devastated. But I wasn't hurt at all. In fact, I felt relieved. Their low blows showed that I had won the argument. If they had to stoop that low, it was only because they couldn't defend their actions or their parenting. I just hope they think twice before calling me again because I'm done with their nonsense. The only thing I regret is that I don't think there's much I can do for my sister. As much as I wish I could help her, it's not my responsibility to fix the mess our parents have made. I just hope she finds her way, even if it has to be without them. It's heartbreaking to think that my sister could have been doing much better if she had been removed from the toxic environment my parents created. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case, and I guess you win some, you lose some. Update 3. A week has passed since I last spoke to my parents. Thankfully, they haven't tried to contact me again, which is probably for the best. From what I've heard through family, they've been trying to downplay my sister's cigarette incident, claiming it was just a one-time mistake and assuring everyone it wouldn't happen again. But no one is buying it. People suspect there's more to the story, and even if this really was her first time, they know my parents are to blame. It's clear that their lack of supervision and discipline led to this situation. Normally, I don't encourage judging people without knowing them, but in my parents' case, I think it's well deserved. After all, who gets rid of one child just because they're having another? Only people like my parents, apparently. I'm relieved that the rest of the family is finally starting to see them for who they truly are. Even my aunt, who had been silent about everything for so long, has started speaking out. She's told people the real reason why my parents sent me away. It wasn't because I was a troubled child, but because they wanted to dedicate all their time and resources to my sister. My aunt has also made it clear that my issues as a child stemmed from how my parents treated me, and that I began thriving only after moving in with her. For years, she stayed quiet to protect their reputation, but now she feels they deserve the backlash. And honestly, they've had it coming for a long time. It's not just our family who's noticed their behavior. Even friends of the family are wary of my parents now, especially after seeing how defensive and in denial they are. They've failed as parents, and the truth is finally catching up to them. Some people might think we're kicking them while they're down, but let's be real. None of this would have happened if they hadn't tried to use me to fix their public image. They brought this on themselves. Update 4. A few weeks have passed, And there's been a major development. My maternal grandparents are now fighting for custody of my sister. I've kept in touch with most of my extended family over the years, so I have a good relationship with my grandparents. When they recently called to ask about my experience with my parents, I decided to be completely honest with them. They were horrified to learn the full story. For years, they had believed my parents had good reasons for sending me away, but now they realized that no reason could ever justify abandoning their own child like that. They even apologized for not seeing the truth sooner, but I assured them it was fine. After all, I didn't look like I was suffering on the surface, so how could they have known? After hearing about the cigarette incident, my grandparents started investigating. They spoke to other family members and learned that my aunt had finally broken her silence, revealing how my parents had completely cut ties with me after leaving me with her. My grandparents decided to take matters into their own hands because they didn't want my sister to endure the same neglect I had. They've already secured temporary custody of her, and from what I've heard, my sister seems indifferent to the change. I think that's actually a good sign. It shows she might not have been as attached to my parents as they wanted everyone to believe. Over time, I'm confident she'll adjust and realize that this change is for the best. My grandparents are hopeful about gaining full custody soon, but they're planning to allow my parents visitation rights, which seems fair. For me, the best part of all this is that my sister has started reaching out to me. We've been talking on the phone for the past few days, and it's clear she's happy to have this connection. I've come to learn that our parents discouraged her from speaking to me for years, claiming I was a bad influence. Now that she's away from their control, she's finally getting to know me, and I can already see the potential for a good relationship between us. I'm cautiously optimistic about our future. For the first time in a long time, I feel like something good might come out of all this mess.